Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. Brian here with you again, one of your co-hosts, running solo to talk a little bit about passwords this week. In the kind of nature of trying to be a little bit more spontaneous with creating content, I had a little bit of time while I'm on the road, so I figured I'd record something for you all to talk about passwords and kind of how it has evolved over time and where we're at, and a little bit of best practices along the way. So I want to kind of start off with talking about passwords as a form of authentication. And I'll talk a little bit about some other ways that authentication can occur as we go along here. But really what it comes down to is that authentication is about something you know to prove who you are, and or something you have to prove you are who you are, and or something you are to prove who you are. And these three things can be used in different combinations, in different ways, in order to create a scenario where the system that you're trying to connect to work with will actually identify you as you and be able to trust you are who you are. The something you know is generally like a PIN code or a password. It could be like, sometimes you have to answer those security question and answer things that you define ahead of time. So it's something that you share with that system that you have inside your brain, or maybe you have written down somewhere, but it's something you know that can prove that you are who you are. Then we've got the something you have. We've seen a lot of different variations of these over the years. Early in this century, a lot of us would carry around these little tokens, these little physical small devices that would usually connect to our keychains that would have a code on it, and that code would cycle and change on a regular basis, and then the system on the other end would know what that code should be. Very similar to what we see with authenticator apps these days. So it's kind of become more of a software solution. There are still places for that hardware token. Smart card is another way of doing that, similar to the chip that you have in your credit card these days. But then the something you have sometimes is just your phone, and that can be in the context of an SMS code. So you log in, hey, we're going to send you a code. All of the advice around, never share that code. Watch out for when you get that code and you're not actually expecting it, someone may be trying to get into your account. That is a something you have solution. And the something you are is essentially biometrics. So fingerprints are common, facial recognition. Iris scans is one that get used in a little bit more higher security. It's not something we see in consumer grade devices very often. But there are things about you that are immutable and don't change over time, thereby proving that you are who you are. So what we see across those three is different combinations usually. And this is where we get into multi-factor authentication, usually combining, the most common is something you know, your password and your username, and something you have, your smartphone, your phone number for the SMS code, that kind of thing. That's a common combination that we see these days. Logging into our phones and our computers are oftentimes something you are with a fingerprint or facial recognition, getting us in there. We don't generally tend to put multi-factor authentication on our devices, though sometimes, like when you reboot your phone or something, it's going to force you to do the something you know aspect of things. So combination of those is how you authenticate to a system, how you get into a system and prove that you are who you say you are. So then from there, I kind of want to talk about the security of passwords itself. That's a hot topic. There's a lot of conversation around there. Of course, having strong, unique passwords is the first and foremost aspect of things that you should do. They're essential for protecting your online accounts, sensitive information. The more complex and more importantly, the longer your password is makes it more difficult to guess or to crack. So cracking is that process of trying to figure out what your password is. Um, a significant percentage of data breaches when you see, hey, this company had a data breach and they've lost, PII type data, personal identifiable information. Generally, this is coming from weak or stolen passwords. So protecting your passwords and making them hard to guess is important. The cracking aspect of things, you know, brute force attacks is oftentimes the way they go about doing that, which is they find out what your username is and then they start running an algorithm. And it's really just a matter of compute power at that point. So the longer it is, the longer it will take to guess what that is. Sometimes they'll get a hold of the hash of your password. Is a way of storing passwords securely is by hashing them. And then instead of actually matching the direct password, you match the hash that I give to the system, and it says, hey, this is the same hash, so it's probably the same password. With that hash, can introduce a way of more efficiently trying to brute force it. So the longer it is, the longer it'll take. There's some really good research done and articles that get published on a regular basis that talk about as compute power improves, what does it take to crack a password? And they'll show you the different combinations, the lengths, and that kind of thing. And it takes seconds to brute force a 8-character password that is only letter combinations. So it can be pretty meaningful to have that longer password. Credential stuffing is another way they go about it. This is usually taking a leak from another data breach and saying, hey, let's try, let's use like a random example of, this site gets breached. They get all the passwords, and so they publish those usernames and passwords. Cool. Well, here's Brian.Knutson, and this is a password he used on site A. Let's go to site B and site C and try that same combination. And this is where it's super important not to reuse passwords, because we oftentimes will reuse usernames. If you ideally want the greatest security, you will not reuse usernames. You'll make random usernames and random passwords on every single site. Phishing and social engineering is another way to go about it, where they will either try to get you to just give them your passwords. This is where, those random messages that you get that say, hey, I'm trying to log in for you. Can you share your password real quick so that I know that I'm talking to the right person? Something like that. Is a way to trick them into revealing the password and being able to then log in for them. Similar thing happens with the SMS side of things. Hey, I'm trying to log into the site. Hey, we saw a bad attempt at logging into your account on site A. We're going to send you an SMS code. Can you share that with us so that we know that we're talking to the right person? And boom, they figured out what your password is. Now they're getting into that two-factor authentication side of things. Dictionary attacks is a way to speed this up as well. So a way of saying the most common passwords. And sadly, the word password is the most commonly used word in passwords. And so password 1, password 1, 2, password 1, 2, 3, password 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Really cuts down on the time when we talk about the brute force attacks and trying to guess it. It's not just, we're going to start with A and then B and then C and then keep iterating through every possible combination. They're going to start with these dictionary attacks and use words that are common in passwords and try to get into them. And it's pretty sad what the most common passwords are, based on research done through data leaks and stuff like that. Personal information and privacy comes into play pretty heavily here. This is a thing that Milo and I talk a lot about when it comes to privacy is don't share a lot about your life on social media. Pets' names, kids' names, your address, your phone number, things like that. If you use those as part of your username or your password, sharing your phone number, especially if it's your mobile number, can be really dangerous because if they're going to try and spoof your SMS and steal your SMS, they need your phone number. And once they have your phone number, then that's like one of the hardest parts of trying to steal your phone number and therefore the something you have of your multi-factor authentication. So be very careful about sharing that kind of information for that reason. So to kind of summarize all of this, what we look at is common password vulnerabilities end up being weak passwords, reuse, non-random, using personal information, um, and of course the human element. So why do we choose bad passwords? Why do we give up our information? Phishing works, social engineering works, and being very cognizant of these things that can lead to passwords going into the wrong hands is super important. This is why password managers are so highly recommended these days. Sure, you're putting all your passwords in one place, but your chances of forgetting them are much, much lower. The passwords themselves can be much more complex, and potentially even something no one would ever remember. So there's a little bit of an element of what you know is like outsourcing your brain to these password managers so that they always know everything for you. Um, sure, that means that if they crack your login to that password manager, they may have access to everything. But at least individual sites that they attack would be isolated, even if they do happen to get that password. So super important to kind of use that to make each individual site, and then use one really complex passphrase, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, that makes it really, really hard to guess or to crack the password to that password manager. So let's talk a little bit about strong passwords. If you're not going to use a password manager, or you do want to create that strong password for that password manager, length and complexity is important, as I mentioned before. And using passphrases, as I mentioned, are going to be super important as well. So these are things that, in an ideal scenario, you just pick like 5 random words, string them together, and do some complexity in there. It doesn't have to be super complex. Like you don't have to replace every A with an @ symbol. You don't have to, put exclamation points at the end of every single one. Um, though those things will help, the length is by far the most important thing, especially um, like for your password manager where you want to be able to remember it. And so pick some random words, pick a phrase that you will always remember, that you will only remember, then and that is ideally doesn't exist anywhere else in the world is the thing there. Um, so that can help you to remember it, to have a complex password that you can use to then protect all your other randomly generated passwords that are out there. Now let's talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication. I mentioned this at the front, in the fact that those 3 different types of authentication mechanisms rely on MFA in a lot of ways. MFA is really important because it adds an extra layer of defense. So if they crack a password, they still have to get to your SMS, or if they somehow get a hold of that hardware token that you use to log in, and you use a multi-factor authentication with a fingerprint, it's a lot tougher to get that fingerprint in addition to that SMS token. So having that combination just adds extra work that they have to do. And quite frankly, unless they're trying to target you very, very specifically, like you're a CEO or CFO of a company, or you have, like a really big social media presence that they want to get entry into, then odds are they're not going to take the time to figure that out. For average people, putting 2 speed bumps in the way is usually enough for them to just be like, okay, enough is enough. I'm moving out. Moving on to somebody else that's a little bit easier. So it's a bit of you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than the slowest person in your group. That can make it easier to keep your information safe. Um, so I talked a lot about the different kinds of MFA, so I'm not going to repeat that. But it really can help when it comes to those credential stuffing attacks, phishing attempts. If they have to phish to get your password, they're going to have to phish to get that SMS code. So having multiple ways to protect yourself is super important. One of the really popular topics in authentication today is actually getting away from passwords and not having to rely on people having 90 different passwords that they have to remember, or having to have a password manager to be a single point of failure across all your passwords. This is commonly called passwordless authentication. Really what it is a way of being more of or relying more on the what you have aspect of things. So oftentimes what you'll see is a certificate-based or a token-based authentication, where when you go to a site and you say, I want to enable passwordless, um, they'll send a certificate, an encrypted file, essentially, or string of text is maybe the better way to put it, that you can put into your password manager. Your browser can save it. Your operating system can save it. You know, save it on your device, that kind of thing. And all the sites that you want to log into, or all the devices, sorry, that you want to log into, um, need to have that token on them. Right now, it's kind of in a mode of just make it easier to log in. So, hey, you can do the passwordless authentication to skip having to do the two-factor authentication to get in. Um, Kind of a cool technology. It's one that's being developed and iterated on pretty fast right now. So that it's a fast-moving space, but a lot of the bigger sites are now actually preferring this method, which is kind of cool because anything that makes logging in easier, that is more secure, is a good way to go. Another aspect of this is adaptive authentication. This is still much more in the earlier phases, which is really kind of looking at the risk of somebody trying to log into an account. So if I'm logging in from a different state or different country than I normally log into, it raises the risk profile of this login. And it says, maybe instead of using just a password, we should force multi-factor authentication. I've seen this on a few sites. It's like, hey, this is abnormal for you. I just want to double check that this is actually you. I'm going to send you an SMS text. Um, that's a way of looking at what's happening, how this is occurring, and if different, if the behavior is different, then let's put something in there. Um, so it's looking at patterns. It's pattern recognition. Some of these even go to the fact of like, hey, what was mouse movements and what type of browser you're using. There's lots of things that in this digital age we reveal a lot of information about ourselves every time we touch a website. They can use that information to better identify who we are. Um, so generally the way it works is user goes says, hey, I want to log into this. Site says, okay, cool, give me that certificate, give me your passwordless identifier, and then we send that over. And it's built on traditional public key cryptography. It's kind of stuff that is pretty standard on the internet these days. It's just a new way of utilizing it. So a lot of advantages to that because it can eliminate phishing altogether. Like you'd have to give up your device or send them that certificate, which is generally not easy to do. But if they do get a hold of your device, they kind of have the easy route in. Um, Social engineering, really quite honestly, best practices is you should never allow someone else to use your device unless you're straight up looking at it. I have a lot of issues when somebody says, "Oh, can I take that picture for you?" when we're trying to take a selfie, and I generally say no. Like at this point, I'm good with the look of a selfie. I don't, unless I'm having a hard time getting it framed the way I want to. I'm not going to hand my phone to somebody else. If nothing else, like my phone is unlocked at that point, and they may run away with it. They may do something while they're waiting for us to post things and act like they're doing things, but instead what they're doing is they're unlocking my password manager and giving themselves access or something like that. So that device level aspect of things is super important, but quite frankly, the what we have is definitely one of those aspects of authentication that is unfortunately very embedded into who we are these days. So a really interesting move there. Passkeys is another kind of subset of the passwordless side of things. Um, Generally, this is where we're directly connected to a device, or like password managers are introducing support for passkeys. So it's kind of a specific version of that passwordless concept that I talked about, really focusing on that cryptography certificate aspect of it, and making it really easier to log in to sites, as well as eliminating kind of the weakest spot, which is us humans, in social engineering phishing type scenarios. Um, so passkeys is another implementation, I would say, of passwordless that you're probably seeing a lot these days. Um, I'm slowly adopting it for different sites, particularly on ones where I know I'm rarely ever log in from more than one device, and where I can have that one device be that easy route there. So That was a lot. There's obviously a lot in the space. I will recommend you go back and listen to a previous episode that we had, and I'll put it in the show notes around um, what the future of password of authentication is going to be. We had a great conversation about that, so I would recommend that as kind of the even further out. I'm trying to kind of keep it to today technology that was really talking about where we may be in 5, 10 years. But what can you do? What else can you do today? So enable MFA. Every account that allows you to do MFA, you should enable it. It shouldn't be a question at this stage. It's a pain. It's difficult. Most sites will kind of give you a fast pass through it, whether that's, hey, remember this device, and that shuts down the SMS. When it comes to picking your multi-factor authentication, if you have the choice, SMS is your worst choice, but it is better than nothing. It is pretty easy to steal your phone number these days. SIM swapping is the concept that you hear there, which is essentially either a piece of code or a physical device that you put in your phone is your SIM, SIM, and that is your identifier to the mobile network, who you are and what your device is. So when you go to upgrade your phone, you can literally just swap that SIM out from one phone to the other, and you automatically will connect to that network with that new device. Of course, now it's a much more digital process. eSIM is a concept these days, and so there are well documented ways of going and stealing and transferring a phone number to a new SIM, or just stealing that eSIM altogether. Ideally, you want to use like an authenticator app. Email is probably even worse than SMS. So get that code in email. You got to pick what's right for you though. Having something is better than nothing. Of course, as you go along, you want to regularly review your passwords, make sure you're updating. The best practices have kind of shifted away from change your password every 30, 60, 90 days to the longer your password is, the less you have to change it. So it's a little bit of an incentivization to pick a longer, more complex password and then to have to change it less frequently, because the risk of forgetting passwords means people tend to reuse passwords or to follow patterns. And again, you want to avoid using patterns. So, if you have to change every 90 days, cool. Well, I'll pick one word for the year and then simply change the season. So in the spring, I say, armadillo spring 01, and then armadillo autumn 01, and so on and so forth. That makes it a lot easier to guess at that point, especially if an old password gets released, and the concept of a dictionary attack really comes into play there. Where available, start using passwordless. Use passkeys. Specifically is kind of the best implementation of passwordless. Some sites are actually going straight to passwordless, where they will send you an email. You give them your username, they send you an email. You copy a code, click a link, and now all of a sudden you're in the site. Email is not a secure mechanism, so I really don't recommend that if you can avoid it, because it's super easy to see email. Email is rarely encrypted, so it's easy to catch. It's usually pretty easy to break into. Talk to others about these best practices. That's what Milu and I are here trying to do, is to try and make this a shareable type of an episode where you can share it with people, so they can better understand what to do and what's going on. And know what to do if your password or device is compromised. If you lose your phone, you've got that authenticator app. Good for you. That's the right thing to do. But what do you do when you lose your phone and you don't have all those codes anymore? Understanding what to do in that front, whether that's, there are ways to register your MFA, your authenticator app on 2 different devices, giving you the ability to have a backup in that situation. The whole concept of authentication apps has changed a lot in the last few years, so that it's a little bit more flexible for device changes. So that's kind of where we are today when it comes to authentication, and a little bit more specific on passwords themselves. Obviously, we're still living in a password world. We're trying to transition our way out of that. So there's a lot that goes on there. So I appreciate your time. I wish you well, and hope you can adapt some of these ways of doing authentication to your day to day, and be able to be a little bit more safer out there, which is what we want for all of you. So with that, I'll cut out on this episode, and we'll talk to you on the next one. And I appreciate you socializing with us.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.